I've done the comparisons for the Harry Potter books and movies, and just things that I think the movies, all the time will say like, the books. And very rarely do people stop and go like, no, the movies handled this very, very well. And I've been meaning to finish doing this, and I've gotten better at doing this since I started it. But in honor of Lord Voldemort's birthday, so shout out to all you Capricorns out there. Yeah, Lord Voldemort's birthday is New Year's Eve. And I'm going to try to have parts 1 and 2 done by then. But we're going to split Deathly Hallows up just because, yeah, there's a reason why they split them up into movies, too. I don't know how other people distinguish this one, but Mom and I just call it the tent one. So we're going to go up to where the movie ends. Now, there are some things that I think honestly, I think that Half-Blood suffered the most. I really do. And some people will argue that it's Goblet. I think Half-Blood suffered the most because there's a whole ass battle that takes place. Also, it did some things very well. Like the scene with Slughorn talking about Harry's mom, that's not in the books. And I think that's a great scene and a great performance when he says, "Be brave, Professor, be brave like my mother." And they talk about the fish. That's one example of something I think they did very well. Deathly Hallows, we'll get into it, but I think I read this one the least. And I love it. And I say this in all of my videos about this. Man, Voldemort is cold. He's so cold. Like, what a great villain. Oh, also, J.K. Rowling, I see you out there being real gross. And just because somebody loves a piece of media and it's special to them, like, I'll never regret having the Elder Wand tattooed, because the Elder Wand and this story is special to me personally, and there's a reason why I have this, and it's special to me and a friend and a long story, and we'll get into that another day. But J.K. Rowling, I don't support you or what you're doing or the people you're hanging around, and I think it's real gross, and I think you're real gross, and I think you're causing a lot of issues for a lot of people, and I don't like that, and I do not condone it, and I want to get that out of the way real quick. Let's get Voldy down. Oh, is it time to take the Christmas lights down? Get down here, Voldy. Every single time I go to find my Slytherin's locket, I can't find it, and then every time I don't need it, I find it in a really stupid place. It's in a really stupid place, isn't it? I'm telling you guys, this is going to piss me off if I don't find it, because I just was thinking this the other day, and then I found it sitting somewhere dumb. Come on. You'd think I'd keep this somewhere safe, right? Not me. This is really, really going to piss me off. Found it. Okay. I'm happier now. Should we do Christmas lights? I mean, I think we're good now. Right, Voldy? I think we're good. But either way, Deathly Hallows Part 1. It's kind of a snooze fest. The book is definitely a lot more going. But rewatching this one, aka the tent one, I think you get something different from Harry Potter as a story from when you're a kid and when you're an adult. And I grew up with these. I talk about this a lot. Like, I graduated. I walked to get my diploma for high school the day it aired, like the day it premiered, the day the final Deathly Hallows premiered. But with all of these, I always forget just how menacing and cold-blooded Voldemort really is. And this book, I feel like the book starts off with a bang, where the movie, it's more of a slow burn. They're very similar in we're having the meeting at the Malfoys, and I think this is some of Ralph Fiennes' best work as Voldemort. I love his intro in Goblet. But when he looks at Lucius and makes fun of him and mocks him and goes, "My lord," is one of my favorite scenes in this entire series. We have Voldemort figuring out that him and Harry have twin wand cores, and so they can duel to harm, but they can't duel to kill. So he needs one of them to give up their wand. And in the book, it's described as, it was as if Voldemort asked one of them to give up one of their arms. Like, this is a very demeaning, huge thing that he's asking, and that's why he does it to Lucius, because he's mad at the Malfoy family. That's why he's like, look at me in your house doing what I want. And I really do, I don't know why this always stuck out to me in the books, is when Yaxley and Snape are walking up to Malfoy Manor in the very beginning, and you get the vibe that the other Death Eaters kind of always didn't like the Malfoys and thought they were uppity and higher up than they deserved, and not really as I find your lack of faith disturbing, that their faith in the cause is not as strong as theirs. Because I always really liked when he says to Snape, he always did well for himself, Lucius, peacocks, really? And he's talking about the white peacocks they have on their property. And he's just talking smack. I think the movie does a very good job of showing Burbage, the teacher. So this is a teacher that we never really meet before, but we know that it is one of Snape's colleagues, and we know that Draco is horrified. And you really get the feeling in the book that Draco is very not about what the Dark Lord's doing, and he's really not about him being in his house. And the way Voldemort talks about Nymphadora, about Tonks, and about her marrying Remus Lupin, ew. It's so, because you know what metaphor they're going for. And that's why I'm like, J.K. Rowling, what are you out here doing? You're embarrassing, and you're gross, and you're spitting on your entire legacy of like love and acceptance of differences. And what are you doing out here? Like, go F yourself. How about that? You're ew. But when Voldemort is saying to, because Nymphadora, Bellatrix, and Narcissa are all sisters. So that would be Bellatrix Lestrange, who kills Sirius Black, Nymphadora Tonks, who marries Remus Lupin, and Narcissa Malfoy, who's Draco's mom. They're all sisters. And Voldemort, at first, is kind of acting, I don't know if you can say like cheerful, but in a cocky way, he's like, oh yeah, and you can do this and you can do that. And he's talking to all of them and to that family specifically. And then he's like, and the Malfoys don't seem very happy to have me in their home, do they? Have they lost faith in our cause, this, that, and the other thing? And everybody's kind of laughing at them. And that's why in the movie, I feel like they did a good job of showing Malfoy's dad is pretty haggard and tired and beat down. And you can tell he's not his luscious locks self. You know what I'm saying? Books always are going to have more description, but with a camera, we can only see and hear what they show us. So we can obviously tell, even if you haven't read it, that Lucius has been through it and he's kind of stressing. Then I always really liked that even in this very beginning, we hear about Narcissa, Draco's mom, barely moving her head enough that Draco knows she's nodding to him, but nobody else at the table can tell, which is a foreshadowing to later on with Harry. And anybody who knows Harry Potter knows it's all about moms. His mom protected him. Narcissa, the mom, is the one who says he's dead and goes in to get Draco and save. It's really to save Draco, but is Draco alive? That's what saves Harry in the Dark Forest, is another mom. And then who's defending him constantly? Mrs. Weasley. And this is something that I talked about in my, I think it was my Half-Blood or my Order of the Phoenix review, or not even review, but comparison. I saw a meme, and it wasn't that long ago, and I was commenting hardcore on it. And you know when you're commenting really hardcore on a meme, and you're like, listen to me. And I'm just like, no. It said something, I'll try to find it, but I didn't make it. But I've talked about this. It said something along the lines of, can we just appreciate that for a moment in time, over half the order was Weasleys? Now, that's also why this is so, not only does Molly Weasley, or Molly Pruitt with her maiden name, feel very strongly about not treating muggles like crap, but her brothers, Fabian and Gideon Pruitt, were both murdered last time in the First Order of the Phoenix. So she's got family that's already been murked by them, and she's like, I ain't taking this no more. So then her kids are in it, and it's like, no, I stand for these values no matter what. With my brothers, I stood for it, and you came for us then, and I'm going to stand for it again, and I lose children in it, and it's heartbreaking when you think about it. But Molly Weasley's a badass. Molly Weasley is a G. If anybody else is a G outside McGonagall, it's Molly Weasley. But I always really loved that. I always really loved that Molly never gave up the fight. When she became a mother, she didn't give up the fight. Before she was a mother, before she was married, she didn't give up the fight. She felt this way no matter what. So I just want to give a shout out to Molly Weasley, because I really liked that meme. And I was like, no, not only was it half Weasley family, she's lost people, a lot of them. She's lost a lot of her family, just like a lot of people in this story have. And I think people that haven't read the books don't realize that, and they kind of just think like Harry's the one who's lost the most. And it's like, no, a lot of people lost a lot of family. Charity Burbage, that's her first name. She's the Muggle arts teacher. So she teaches the magical students about Muggle life. And she's pretty much begging Snape, like, to help her while at first she's comatose above the table. And I do think the movie does a good job with this, but just like with everything, they kind of tone it down a bit because she's straight up being tortured. So this woman, this teacher from Draco's school, is hovering above the table, and Voldemort's given his monologue, and this is some of the grossest stuff he says, besides at the end of Deathly Hallows, is when he's talking about Nymphadora having kids and how she had kids with Remus Lupin. And he's like, yeah, Draco, but will you watch the Cubs? And everybody starts laughing. And it's this degrading, gross thing that she had kids with a werewolf. And it's like, you can take that metaphor however you want. J.K. Rowling has gone on record saying that she wrote the character Remus Lupin after friends she grew up with having AIDS, and people misjudging that. But you can take it however you want. You can take it as differences, as race, as anything, and it's like, ew, so gross, and it's just so low. And Voldemort's like, yeah, that's so beneath us. I think Remus Lupin might be in my top 3 favorite characters. But that's how we start out at Malfoy Manor. And it's pretty spot on with the movie and the book, except for I do like that the movie... Now, it's not to say that I like one more than the other. I'm just saying having Snape show up alone is more striking visually. And so I think that was a smart move on David Yates, the director. But in the book, he does have a cohort with him. And I always like that Voldemort wants people on time. And the other thing that I always really liked, and this is not in the books, a great line that Ralph finds that Voldemort has is, spoken like a true politician. Voldemort don't even respect politicians. He knows they're dirty liars. And it's like, if Voldemort don't like them, what does that say about our politicians? If you dive deeper into it, and we've talked about this in my other comparisons, the use of media and politics and not telling the truth to the mass is a huge theme in Harry Potter. Also, the importance of getting a hold of child minds and molding them to the way you want them to be. Voldemort knows how important that is. That's why he continued to become, that's why the Defense Against the Dark Arts post never sticks, because he cursed it. And he knew how important it was to mold child minds into thinking in a negative way, and how it was so much easier for him to take over if he could come into the school and teach them when they're young. And it's like, that's a very scary thought, and it's very true. I definitely think that's something that is missed on people that haven't read it, but it's a heavy, heavy theme in the books of like, no, teaching Dumbledore even says it. He's like, I had to reject power. I was not suited to power. I would abuse power if I had it. I was meant for teaching and to help these young minds. And how important that is. We still have Nagini eating her, which is pretty rough. One thing that I do appreciate from both the movies and the books is that neither side respects Peter Pettigrew. Neither side. Voldemort doesn't. He thinks he's a dirty sneak rat, for lack of a better term. And so the Order thinks he's a dirty sneak rat, and the Death Eaters do. Nobody trusts Wormtail. And I always do you want to know what I realized rewatching these and rereading them to do these? One thing I never picked up on is the reason Snape is so good at potions is because Lily was. And so I think they never explicitly say that, but they talk about how good she was at potions. And it's like, I'm assuming that Snape became so good at it because not only is he a very accomplished wizard, but he wanted to impress her. And I'm like, oh my God, that all makes sense. But he hates Wormtail for selling Lily out. Voldemort hates Wormtail for being a snake in the grass. I can't trust you for nothing. You're a coward who hides behind bigger, scarier friends. And the same reason why the Order don't like you. And I do like that he's just this gross guy in the corner that nobody respects. And I do love when Voldemort yells at him. He's like, Wormtail! Ray finds this performance as Voldemort in the first 5 minutes of this movie is not appreciated enough. Another thing that always kind of upset me that they didn't do in the movie, this is one thing that I'll knock against it. I always loved the scene in the books when Dudley tries to be nice to Harry. he leaves the cup of tea out, and Harry cuts his hand. And Harry's like, man, Dudley did this as a prank. He left cold tea out here. What a jackass. And the truth is, Dudley's concerned, and he's so used to having Harry there, even though he's been a bully to him. And this just goes to show you, like, the bully is nothing without somebody to bully. And even though Dudley has treated Harry like crap his whole life, he's become caring for him, and he gets upset when Vernon and Petunia are like, yeah, we got to go with these order people. And in the movie, it is more stoic, and I do like I think the music and the scene is set very well. I'm not knocking it. There's just something about Dudley telling Harry, you're not a waste of space, and that coming to a close that they don't do in the movie that I wish they did do, because I always really liked that they did that. I always really liked that Vernon don't care. My personal theory with Petunia is that she couldn't look at Harry. I don't think they're good people. I think the Dursleys are scumbags because you're mean to a kid, and that's not acceptable. But Petunia has this resentment because every time she looks at Harry, she's reminded of her dead sister. And it's like, yeah, you lived and she's gone. And I'm upset about that. And it was more, and sometimes it's played off as Lily was special and Petunia wasn't. But we find out that she was corresponding with Dumbledore and this and that. And she knows what Azkaban is. And Vernon is horrified. And we learn all of that. But I always got the vibe of like, no, Petunia is so resentful of Harry because she loved her sister so much. And she might not want to admit that, but that's the truth here. But I do like the way they wrap things up with the Dursleys. Now, when you're doing something on camera, you need it to flow, you need it to go, there's a certain pace you have to stick to. I like having the Daily Prophet lining Hedwig's cage. This is that's a huge change, and we'll get to that. And I remember I saw this movie before I read Deathly Hallows, and I was pissed, because I was like, if Mad Eye goes down, I'm gonna be mad, because I love Mad Eye Moody. But Hedwig does not die the way she dies in the book. Hedwig goes out like a G. Hedwig goes out swinging and is like, yeah, no, not today, Voldemort. I'm coming at you with everything I got. And in the book, she just gets taken out. I liked that change in the movie. And I like that Harry says it, is that I think Hedwig gave me away. She was protecting me. But the one thing that is being established at Malfoy Manor is they've infiltrated the Ministry. And like I said, Voldemort ain't got time for politicians. He thinks that they're scumbags and they're sneak rats, and they're all trying to get this information on when they're going to move Harry. And if Harry moves in the wizarding world at 17, you're an adult. That's also why I really love in the book when Molly Weasley gives Harry, it's tradition to give a wizard a watch on their adult birthday. And she gives Harry one of her dead brother's watches. And that's like a big deal. And I always really like that. And it speaks volumes about how she views Harry as her own and will defend him like her own. And I like that he has his cake and stuff. I like that he has his birthday. Hermione has a line added to that of dialogue of saying, we had a cake for you. We had this all planned for you, because that does happen in the book. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The Death Eaters established that they've infiltrated the Ministry. We see how cold-blooded they're being. We see how Snape is playing both sides, but we don't really know that yet. Alan Rickman is killing it. This cast, every time I watch this acting, I'm like, man, they really were great. Then we have the Dursleys leaving. Then we have the Order showing up. Now, before Harry's 17th birthday, they need to move him in a way that isn't being monitored by the Ministry. So they can't use the Flu Network. They can't use, what's the one? Apparition. They can't do that. They have to use Thestrals, brooms, things that can't be tracked. The Death Eaters do get the correct information and find out that they're going to move Harry the night before his birthday. Like I said, I like the change in the movie to having Hedwig defend him, and I do like that they say out loud with Hagrid saying, I brought you here, and I'm gonna leave with you. Rest in peace, Robbie Coltrane. Something I have to say real quick. This entire franchise hinged on Robbie Coltrane, on Hagrid. If we as kids would not have trusted Hagrid, this adult welcoming us into this world, this would not have worked. And without Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid, this entire series, this entire movie franchise, it would have fallen apart. And I stand by that statement. About Alpheus Doge, who wrote Dumbledore's obituary, and we find out that they went to school together, and Harry really wants to talk to him. He's the one who, in the movie, Harry talks to at the wedding. In the book, he does drink Polyjuice Potion. I do like that they kept that part out of it. The one thing that I wish they would have kept in, but I think it's just because I love Victor Crumb, is Victor Crumb is the one who pops off at the wedding about the Deathly Hallows symbol and straight up tries to fist fight Luna Lovegood's dad. And I always really love that scene in the book because it not only introduces us to the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, but it shows how big of a deal Grindelwald was. And this would be like somebody of Jewish descent seeing a swastika around somebody's neck and going like, do you know how many of my family died because of that? Do you get it? Because this is something that is affiliated with Grindelwald, and it's looked at as this negative connotation until they learn more about it from Xenophilius Lovegood and from the others. But Crumb at first tries to fist fight him, and he's like, do you get it? Grindelwald etched that into the school I go to, and we know that stands for him. And so it's looked at as this negative thing at first, and I always really loved that scene and what it's trying to say, because everybody always gets mad, and I've talked about this before, there's always been tons of World War II references in Harry Potter. When does Grindelwald get defeated? 1945. When does World War II end? 1945. There are tons of comparisons there. So I always really liked that one. And it was always really Third Reichy. And so that's why I don't mind it in Crimes of Grindelwald and in the Fantastic Beasts series. Because I'm like, no, it says it on Dumbledore's chocolate frog card. If any of the movies have a pacing issue, I do think it's the beginning of this one. I do think this one starts out a little bit slow. We mainly just have the wedding. In the book, like I said, we have the flight of the Potters. We have them all turning into Harry. We have Hedwig passing, which I think Hedwig passing is one of the saddest. We have Mad Eye dying. We have Hedwig dying. We get to the Burrow, and everything's pretty spot on to the books. We have George gets hit, right? Because Fred's the one who passes away. We still I do love that the movies paid attention to detail to the point where Percy is in the background. Percy's there in Order of the Phoenix when Dumbledore does the clap, and it's great. And he's there in Deathly Hallows, and he realizes, I need to be on the correct side of history here. And Percy is the jackass oldest brother of the Weasleys who's a know-it-all. But I really like that actor's back, and if you don't notice him, he is throughout the entire series. I do enjoy Dumbledore's obituary, where we do learn a lot about his family. We learn about his dad going to Azkaban, Albus's dad, and we learn about Aberforth, and Aberforth is my favorite. We learn about Ariana. We learn a lot about the Dumbledore family and through Alpheus Doge's obituary on Albus. And I do think Daniel Radcliffe does a great job acting when the Weasley's aunt says at the wedding, like, do you even know him? And he's really hurt by that. That bothers Harry throughout this book, is like, did I even know this guy? Or am I just out here chasing shit down that he said was a good idea and I don't even know? A really great line in the obituary where, like, at the very end, it's like, just like how he was when he got older, Albus always reached out even to the little loser kid with dragon pox. And he's talking about himself and how Albus was always giving and would lend a helping hand. And I always really love the line in the movie where he says, and for some reason, most don't count Aberforth. And that's such an intriguing relationship to me, is Aberforth and Dumbledore. And I think a lot of siblings can relate to that. I can, where it's like, no, Aberforth and Albus are very different people. But when it comes down to it, when the rubber hits the road, not only do we have each other's backs, but we know how each other is morally. And even though Aberforth might be a little wayward, and he makes some remarks of like, where are you going to peddle your illegal potions if I'm gone? Where are you going to do this? Nobody finds out that that's Albus Dumbledore's brother. Nobody finds out that that's him in the Hogshead. And he holds it down. And I love Aberforth for that. And there's something to be said for that. Find out that Snape is officially on the attack, and he's the one who hit George with a curse. And there's some really great acting between Kingsley and Remus Lupin in the movie when they know that somebody leaked the information, and it's essentially at like gunpoint. They're wand to wand, and they're like, he's like, shut up. What's David Thewlis, who plays Remus Lupin, he kills it in this one. And I love when he yells at Harry and he's like, tell me what creature was in the corner. We've been sold out. But then when him and Kingsley have their back and forth, that's genuinely tense. And you're like, whoa. We don't see this. We don't see the good guys pointing their wands at each other going, yeah, what was it? You better have the right answer, because at this point, it's on. And I always felt like that scene alone really sent the stakes up, if that makes sense. And it does happen in the book, but there's just something that those characters and those actors bring to the screen that really heighten it on film more than on the page. And there is so much that we find out through the obituary, like Albus's mom and dad being gone, and overnight he becomes the head of the family, that he had to give up essentially like his senior year backpacking trip. He had to give that up to become the sole breadwinner. And we find out that Aberforth is extremely resentful of it and is like, I could have done it. I could have done it. You could have just went and looked for Hallows and got the hell on, but you didn't. And he's very resentful and blames Albus for a lot of the things that happened, including Ariana's death. But we don't find that out till way later on. But because we don't have the full obituary in the movie, I do like the way that they handle it, and I do like the conversation that they have. And there is one thing that I wish they would have emphasized more, and that's Fleur Delacour. That's the witch from the Triwizard Tournament that marries into the Weasley family. And I always really like that little dynamic. Do I think it goes on a little too long in the book? Yes. Do I think Mrs. Weasley trying to keep the Golden Trio away from each other goes on a little too long in the book? Yes. But it's because she's scared. And especially with the boggart scene, and if you remember the boggart, that's the thing that can shapeshift, she sees it as one of her kids being dead, and that's her worst fear, and that's so sad. And I always, both the book and the movie do a great job of Hermione being the one prepped and ready to go, but honestly, I think the movie does a better job of showing that Hermione is the one that, without her, they'd be screwed. And Ron even says that. He's like, we wouldn't last 3 days without her, Harry. Shut up. But the setup for the wedding does take a long time, but we do get a lot of key information. But like I said, a lot of things in the obituary aren't outright said in the movie, so they have to show them to us. I like Harry's conversation with Alpheus Doge. I like when Aunt Miriam is like, did you even know him at all, boy? I do like that he's not in disguise on camera. It makes sense for storytelling. It doesn't, like I said, this doesn't mean I'm going one is better than the other. I'm just saying that was smart to do filmmaking-wise. We find out about the duel between Grindelwald, Albus, and Aberforth that killed his sister. A lot of people have come to the conclusion that maybe Grindelwald just waved a white flag and went along. Now, in Crimes of Grindelwald and in the Secrets of Dumbledore, that wand he's using, we never find out where it came from, and it's not the Elder Wand, but it looks just like it. I do think it's its twin. I think that Grindelwald and Albus have twin core wands, and that was something, and that's how he knows about Harry and Voldemort, because he's seen it before. I don't mind that. It always bothered me that they didn't have his funeral in Half-Blood, but having his tomb get desecrated, there's something that sits with you with that, and on screen is very unnerving to have Voldemort that close to this character that we love so much, that is defenseless and gone now. And there's something very degrading, and we see how low this character can be. But yeah, I definitely don't mind them speeding up the wedding stuff, because like I said, this movie and this first half of this book is a lot of setup. I don't mind Deathly Hallows. I love it, obviously, but it is a lot of setup. We get them having to dip out of the wedding. But I do like them showing that love is what matters. That's what Ron is saying the whole time. That's what they're trying to show Harry when Harry's trying to dip out. He's like, I don't care whose wedding it is. And he's like, it ain't about you. He's like, it's not about you, Harry. Like, shove it. Shut up. And it's supposed to show, like, love will conquer all if you just let it. And being there for each other and loving one another and caring for one another are what matter, even in the darkest of times. And I do think the movie does a great job when, especially having Kingsley's voice over it, that he has such a deep melody voice when he's like, the ministry has fallen, run, get out of there. And when they run for the first time and Hermione is telling him, oh yeah, we made you a cake. I love that nod to the book, because they do have a little birthday party for him in the book with a snitch cake and all that. And that's when the minister comes and gives them the 3 objects. He gives Harry the snitch, which we end up finding out is very important. He gives, and Harry's really bothered by that at first, because Hermione's like, isn't that a Death Eater thing? I open at the close. I'm like, what are you doing? And that's another thing that adds to his doubt in Dumbledore. We have Ron getting the Deluminator, and we have Hermione getting the Tales of Beetle the Bard. And that happens at Harry's birthday party in the book. In the movie, we just move it along a little bit. And I never minded that. But I always liked when in both versions of it, when they're like, were you planning on going into magical law, Miss Granger? Because she's like, yeah, I know how this works. And his will said X, Y, and Z. And that means you have to give all those objects up. And we find out that the Sword of Gryffindor is very important. They need to get to that. And That's pretty much this entire movie's setup, is the Sword of Gryffindor and how do we get to these Horcruxes. And then once we get to the second half, we're off to the races. But I do love that transition of the Golden Trio apparating into London, and they're like, shit, it's on. And that also reminds you that the real world exists. That also reminds you of like the creeps yelling at Hermione, and there's more than just the threats of the Death Eaters around us, and we're alone now. That is something that does not happen in the Harry Potter series often, is knowing that they're completely alone. We're not going back to Hogwarts. We're not getting on the train. That's a scene added in that I really do think is great, is when the Death Eaters bring the Hogwarts Express to a halt, this special, fun transportation that we've grown to love every year and get on every year to go to the school. And Neville stands up and he's like, hey, he ain't here. And they bring it to a halt and they get on board. It's a very invasive thing that same thing with Dumbledore's tomb, same thing with the train. It's like this invasive thing of going like, you don't belong here, and desecrating these things that we love. But I really love that scene with Neville. That's not in the books. And then we're mainly just running around in the tent, and we learn about the Snatchers, and we learn, but this is where I do think that the movie, even though I do think it's a bit sluggish and a bit boring sometimes, it does excel in certain areas from the book, like Hermione's perfume that was gifted to her by Ron and things like that. They get that across on screen really well, really creepy, and I really like that. And David Yates does a really good job with this, and he had a lot to go off of, but like I said, there's just a way you have to storytell with a camera. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. And it's like, okay, well, we got to make this work until we get to this big crescendo in part 2. And rewatching it, I'm like, this isn't as boring as I remember it being, and I know I watched this one the least. I wish they would have established Mundungus Fletcher a little better, just a little bit better, because we don't really know that he's a dirty, sneaky rat. We have them going to number 12 Grimmauld Place, which is Sirius's house. We have Ron getting splinched, which is Sirius, and then you find... I wish they would have done a better job explaining, because he latched on to us and because he got through the threshold of the door, we can't go back there. Now our secret charm is broken. Like I was saying, it adds to, not only are we alone, we have no safe place at this point. We can't go to Hogwarts. We can't go to Sirius's house. We're screwed. Or we think we are, but we're all out on our own. And when Ron leaves and comes back, I think Rupert Grint does some genuinely great acting. I think that Emma Watson, Daniel Radcliffe, and Rupert Grint really do wonderful acting in the last 2 movies. I think they really do. A lot of it's intense. It might be like magical fun, but a lot of it is intense. We go from this fun, bright world to this dark and dreary, oh my God, what's going to happen to this world story. First, they kind of have this safe haven that is number 12 Grimmauld Place. And honestly, one of my favorite parts in the book, and I wish they would have put this in the movie, is when Remus Lupin shows up. That might be when they're at Shell Cottage, but either way, when he shows up and Harry tells him off, and he's like, oh, what? You want to chase glory like Sirius did? You want to leave your pregnant wife behind? Yeah, okay, bet. You ain't coming with us. And he says, for the first time in my life, I saw the wolf side, and it scared me, but I stood my ground. And he tells Remus, you ain't coming with us. Go back to protecting your wife and your family. I know what it's like to grow up without parents, and I'm not allowing this to happen. Buzz off, dude. And I think that's a really mature way to show Harry has grown up, and a way to show the stakes are super high, and even he knows it. But yeah, Ron leaving and coming back is always great. Honestly, I was always kind of shocked they did the Hermione and Harry kissing scene as intense as it is. It's pretty intense, and to have that be Ron's biggest fear of like, it's not just Hermione getting with his friend, it's I'm not good enough. Same thing with the mirage of Hermione saying from the mother who wanted a girl and got you, and who could compare to Harry Potter when you like all these terrible things, that it's like all of Ron's insecurities. It hits home for sure. There's a couple really big things in this one that I always really liked, and that's when Hermione says it's Christmas. God, am I gonna get emotional again? Goddamn. Sorry, guys. Oh, it's been a rough year, but no, I always really like that when Hermione says, Harry, I think it's Christmas, and you just like realize these aren't kids anymore. And they didn't even remember that it was Christmas, you know what I mean? And it's just him and Hermione. And he's like, no, this is where I'm from. I want to see where my parents are buried. Do you think they're in there? And I always really like that, but I like it even more in the book if you don't know when Harry goes up to the house. There's a charm on it so that it looks one way until you get up to it, and then there's a statue and a memorial of Lily James and Harry. And I always really loved that. And we learn about Bathilda Bagshot, and I always thought that was a really cool scene that they do. And it's really creepy. It is genuinely creepy and gross and scary when we find out this woman's dead and Nagini is charmed to look like her. And that's why Harry can understand her, is because she's speaking Parseltongue. Now, when Harry's wand breaks, I think this irritates a lot of book readers because that's what he does at the end. Instead of snapping the Elder Wand, Harry repairs his, which is an impossible thing to do. But because he has the Elder Wand, he can. But I always just, there's something very melancholy and sweet but sad when they get to Godric's Hollow. And Harry's like, no, it might have started here, but that doesn't mean my story ends here. You feel me? I always really liked that. And my mom always says that. She's always like, this is what I want me and your dad's tombstone to look like. And I'm like, can you stop being morbid? And she's like, yeah, put a wreath on it. And I always love that Hermione just does it. You know what I'm saying? She doesn't have to be asked. She just does it. That's a nice little touch that it's like, that is something Hermione would do. She doesn't need to be told. She just does it. She might be this logical character, but she has a heart and she knows, like, I'm going to do this thing that a girl would do. I'm going to remember to bring flowers. I'm going to remember to do this little detail, you know? And I always really like that. This is where we're also introduced to Grindelwald. Thing I totally didn't even realize. Guy in Stranger Things. I knew he was Grindelwald. He's young Grindelwald. The guy who plays Vecna. He's young Grindelwald. But what else was he in? I was like, oh my god, he's in Twilight. And I was like, oh my god, we have young Cedric Diggory and we have young Vecna and then we have young Grindelwald. Oh my god, that's kind of funny. But yeah, we find out about him. We find out Grindelwald was related to Bathilda Bagshot. We find out that him and Albus were pretty tight. Now, that's always been my theory, is that Grindelwald isn't anything. He's not gay. He's nothing. He's a manipulator. And he knew, I can manipulate Albus. This is the only one who can stun on me. How do I keep him from hurting me? Manipulate him. I don't think he has feelings. I don't think a tyrant like that can have feelings. I think that he knew love, and this way to manipulate Dumbledore is the only way to take him down. And I think that Dumbledore is an even more tragic character if you look at him that way, where he kind of thought that he loved and lost. But did he really? But then there is the scene in the movies and in the books where Voldemort goes to Grindelwald. And Grindelwald's like, you won't go near him even if he's dead. And you're still shook from him. You're still afraid of him. You know you're still scared of Dumbledore. The wand lies with him. And in the book, and we'll get into this more in part 2, when Harry says, I don't think he wanted his friend's grave desecrated, that's the only time Dumbledore has a tear run down his face. So obviously this person invokes a very strong emotion with him. But I do think that makes Dumbledore an even more tragic alone character, is if he thinks that he had this relationship and this love when he was young, but the truth is, he really didn't. He was just an abusive manipulator. And he loved anyway. And he cared anyway. And he trusted his friends anyway. Even though all this pain happened, even though it hurt, even though it still hurts him, he trusts and cares and loves anyway, and that's the strength of Dumbledore, and that's why we love him. Let's get into some other stuff. While we're at number 12 Grimmauld Place, I stand by this, and some people are going to get really upset with me. Cough, cough, Omari. I think Kreacher has a more compelling story than Dobby. I said it. It doesn't take anything away from Dobby's death. I think that Dobby's death is extremely impactful. I love Dobby, like he's a boss. But Omari makes a really good point. He says that Dobby is the most loyal character in the series. And that's true. And no questions asked, Dobby has Harry's back. And his death does hurt. It's very sad. But when it comes to what I find intriguing, and we find out about the locket, and we find out about Regulus, and we find out what Kreacher went through, that's a very ballsy elf right there, man. He's been through it too. He's been through some shit too. And he stood by he's just as loyal, but to Regulus. And it might be misplaced loyalty on one side, but he doesn't know any better. And I'm not saying that he's better than Dobby, but as a character, there's something intriguing about Kreacher to me as a character. I do love the scene in the movie of them walking down the table together, shoving each other when they first bring Mundungus back. And that's why I wish they would have established Mundungus better in the movies. And I'm sure they tried to. You just can't make kids' movies 5 hours long. They won't pay attention. But, so I don't hate on it for that. It's very hard to do a series like this long for kids to all still enjoy, even though they're getting older. But you still have to be able to bring your 8-year-old with your 13-year-old, with your 19-year-olds. You know what I'm saying? Him and Dobby straight beat the shit out of each other a few times, I'm pretty sure. And those are great scenes in the book. But when they first bring Mundungus back, Kreacher is pissed that Mundungus has gone through Sirius's house and ransacked it. And I always really liked Rupert Grint's performance when Ron says, no, he wants to know if he asked for enough money for it, because he knows Ron's on the up and up. He's like kind of a poor kid street rat a little bit. And he's just like, no, he wants to know if he got enough money for it. And he's like, I didn't get no money for it. Some lady from the ministry took it. And that's how we find out that Umbridge has the locket. But I always really love that scene with Dobby, Kreacher, and Mundungus. I just wish that Mundungus was established more as a character. That's when we learn about the two-way mirror. And we don't fully learn about it, but we know that somebody's watching, that Harry in the books is like, it looks an awful, every so often I see this eye that looks so blue like Dumbledore's. And we later find out that it's Aberforth, and that's why it looks so similar. But that was the two-way mirror that Sirius and James Potter would use to joke around in detention together. And there's little things like that you don't have to know, that add to it if you're a book reader. But even just as a movie watcher, you don't have to know all these things. And that speaks volumes when you're telling a story through a camera. Like I've been saying, when I talk about these things, we can only see and hear what they show us. So the fact that you don't have to read the book and eventually this all makes sense to you, that's not the easiest thing to do. So I give David Yates a lot of credit. But the big ending of this one is Dobby's death. It is, there's a few big things that go down, but the main one is his death and the fight at Malfoy Manor. And we end up finding out, like, no, if you want to call the Dark Lord, you better be ready, because he has no mercy for nobody. And that's why Lucius is like, we have to call. Do you get it? Do you understand, Draco? Like, this isn't just about we're on his side anymore. This is for our life. And he's like, we have to be sure. And I always, the acting by those kids growing up is so well done at Malfoy Manor. When Hermione is screaming and has mud blood carved into her. When Ron and Harry listen to their friend screaming upstairs and they can't do anything and they're defenseless. And then Luna pops up, and I love Luna. Everything about those transitions and scenes are so good and so well done. And I love it. And then even Helena Bonham Carter screaming and yelling, who's in my vault? Like, you know this person ain't playing around. Like, the acting is up here. And I can't imagine how hard it was for those young actors to be like, oh my God, they're really going hard in the paint. I need to step my game up. You know what I'm saying? When she's like, who was in my vault? And she starts going out, and you dare touch a witch's wand, and goes off on Dobby. And Narcissa's like, and Helen McRory, rest in peace, is there. It's an all-star cast, and they're firing on all cylinders, that's for sure. And I love that. But man, when we get the dough showing up and you don't know what that means yet, it still hits you in the gut. Even if you don't know, you know this is a benevolent, kind, warm thing that's there to help. And that's how they end up getting Gryffindor's sword, and how they end up destroying the Horcrux. And I don't know, there's just a way that it's done in the movie that's like magic. And I don't mean to sound lame, but I'm like, it is. It's like magic. And you're like, I know this thing is good. And I know this thing is kind. And I always think it's funny that they kind of just use Ron as exposition and as comedic relief for a long time, but I don't feel that way towards the end. I'm like, no, he says some very like poignant things, but also just some very Ron things where he's like, yeah, isn't that your Patronus? And he's like, no, mine's a stag. And he's like, oh yeah, it's got antlers. That's a difference. But I love that scene, and I love Ron taking the Horcrux out. It's great. And then we officially, this one is essentially, we find out what the Horcrux is, and we know the magnitude of that. And now we really gotta get a move on to getting them. You start to forget where they bleed into each other, because I'm mixing up the Ministry and Gringotts. But I do think Warwick Davis's performance, as also Willow is killing it. Why isn't everybody talking about Willow? That's what we're going to talk about next, is Willow. So freaking good. But his performance as Griphook, the goblin, love it. And you don't know if you can trust, but it's the same thing with Ollivander in the books. And Harry's like, I don't know if I can trust this guy. I don't know if I can't. I don't know if I can or can't trust these guys, but we're going to, because that's what Dumbledore's told me to rely on, is trust and love, and we're going to take a shot at it. But we get hit with the Ministry stuff, and then the next one we start off with Gringotts and going to the vaults and everything. But when Harry and Daniel Radcliffe, when we have Dobby save everybody, and they get to Shell Cottage, and Luna comes up first and says, close his eyes, like he's sleeping. It speaks volumes about Luna. But I always love when Harry says, I'm going to bury the elf. Properly. With no magic. It's so good. It's so good. And when, later on in part 2, when Griphook's like, I saw you bury the elf. Like, him physically burying Dobby is a very big deal. Like, that's a very huge sign of respect from a wizard and from a person to do for this house elf. So it's like, that's a big deal. And when Dobby says to be here in this beautiful place with friends, it's like this small thing is what matters. And that's what people need to remember whenever we talk about this stuff. I know I'm emotional because it's been a hard year. And you lose people, and it sucks. But it's the little things that matter. Being in a beautiful place with friends. And I think a lot of people forget that shit when we talk about things over here. Like, or on just the internet in general. Just, like, be nicer to each other, and what are these big stories really about? Like, when we talk about Lord of the Rings, when we talk about Harry Potter, what are these huge epics really about? They're about loving each other. They're about caring about your friends. They're about looking out for your fellow man. That's what it's all about. And I don't mind the tent one. Next one's going to be super long, but yeah, it's the buildup of finding out what a Horcrux is. It's finding out how we're going to take this guy down. It's trusting in one another. It's sticking to Dumbledore's plan, even though we don't feel like it might be right. We're going to trust, and we're going to care, and we're going to stay friends. And it's great. And I don't care what anybody says. I love Harry Potter. I don't have to agree with J.K. Rowling, and I don't have to agree with what she's doing, and I don't have to support her monetarily or anything from this point forward, because I do think what she's doing is deplorable. But it doesn't change the fact that these stories affect us. And it's like, man, I wish you'd let it affect you a little bit more, creator. You really showed your true colors, didn't you? But I'm happy with Motor City Nerds. And Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. This is an emotional one. It really is. If you go back and watch this one, watch part 1 and part 2. Because that's what I did. And it's a lot. For sure. And not even if you lost a ton of people. And man, Tommy, Mike, my Uncle Tom, Mitchell, Embry, shit, man, Kyle, who else? Terry, in the last 2 years, man, it's just been back to back to back. But you can't let things like that ruin you, you know? That's not what people would want. They want you to keep going. You know? Trust in your friends. Look out for one another. Look out for your fellow man. It is what it is. What does Neville say? People die every day. They're still with us. Right?